All right. Who was the star Airwolf? Was it Jan Michael Dean Vincent?
Dan Michael Vincent,
There you go.
Ernest Borgnine, and someone as the white suited dude with like I can't remember who that was, but yeah, that's the best intro I've ever received. I have to say, I got to steal that one.
Well, I should give you a proper introduction. Welcome to Tigers Radio. I'm Chris Brown. Alongside me is Rogelio Castillo, and we're very happy to bring in JJ Cooper, the editor-in-chief of Baseball America. The source for minor league and major league information. So, JJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank y'all, and again, thank you for that intro. I am an Airwolf fan going back to to my childhood, and every now and then still will go up on YouTube and find the crazy clip of the time that there was a virus in the computer of the helicopter. So they climbed to 100,000 feet, hold the pressurization, somehow dive a helicopter 100,000 feet, and pull out 5 feet above the ground because they're that good. And and that somehow made sense to me as a 10-year-old. Makes sense. Yeah, that's the way to survive the virus.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, everything back in those days, people always talk about it seemed like every show had an issue with quicksand at one point. Oh, God, we got to get out of this quicksand.
Killer bees and quicksand were my two big phobias as a child. I gotta watch out for that quicksand. And the worst thing would be catching quicksand and the killer bees come over and attack you while you're in the quicksand.
Yeah, they'll wait for you to come out of that quicksand.
Yeah.
No, I was telling, it's Veterans Day. I don't know if you're a veteran, JJ, but I was telling Rogelio,
I am not.
The few things I know about you just from your public Twitter persona. I know you're way into, I don't know if it's military technology, or at least planes.
Aviation, yeah, aviation. I would say, and I'm not. I always honor my grandfather was on a destroyer in World War II. My father was an Air Force vet. During he didn't serve in Vietnam. He served in the Air Force during the Vietnam era. He was never deployed overseas. So I honor them. I lost that in my grandfather's brother was also on a destroyer in the same task force and was unfortunately killed in a kamikaze attack on June 6, 45. So,
holy cow.
My grandmother, this is the craziest story in the world. My grandmother was engaged to what would be my great uncle, who was the one who was killed. And then post World War II, they were trying to comfort each other. They fell in love, and that is my grandmother. So my grandmother not only is married to my grandfather, but was also engaged to be married to my great uncle who passed away, because that's how that's the craziness of growing up in the 30s and 40s.
Wow, that's a wild alternate history type thing there. I can imagine. Yeah, my grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. My other grandfather was in the Marines, and then my grandfather also served in the Korean War doing nighttime minesweeping.
Wow.
They got some sort of award for doing that. One of those. I think they're called awards. Yes, a medal. Yes. Anyway, not to go off too far into that, but we did want to. Normally, we start off by asking our guests about their earliest baseball memory rather than their earliest aviation memories. But if you got one, we'd love to hear it.
Oh yeah. So the earliest I have, I would say I'm a child of the 70s. I'm old now, but the earliest memory I remember is the '79 All-Star game and Dave Parker with the throw to home. But I will say, if you said what locked me in as a baseball fan, it was that '79 World Series, Pirates versus Orioles. I'm from Georgia. I can't explain why that's the series that did it. But I wanted to be Omar Moreno and I wanted to be Kent Tekulve. If you put me out on a mound as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, I was going to at least once or twice in that, in an at bat, I was going to drop down sidearm and see if I could surprise you. And I wanted to. I didn't. Again, this was before the world of analytics. I didn't realize that a guy who hits 260 and never walks and steals bases at a 55-60% clip isn't exactly the gold standard of what you're looking for. I thought Omar Moreno was really cool. And then I years later, covering the Macon Braves, my first job out of college, Willie I got to run across like Willie Stargell and all, and that was like, okay, that's I'm seeing here. I'm seeing the head of the family from We Are Family in '79, and that was a very cool experience.
Wow, yeah, I would have guessed like Dale Murphy would have been your guy at that age, but
well, it became like I will say, like growing up then. Well, then the funny thing is that's '79. My dad, as I mentioned, he was actually at this point civilian with the Air Force, but he was transferred to Norton Air Force Base in California. So I got out there just in time for Blue Monday and the Dodgers beating the Expos, and then moved back to Georgia just in time for '82 when the Braves had that one of their few successful seasons. So a lot of really good baseball in my late, or 6, 7, 8, 9 to 10, 11, 12 that locked me in. But I would say that the weird thing about it is even though I was not a journalist or anything like that, is I was a fan of baseball. I love the '85 Cardinals because I thought it was really cool how they were all, they all stole bases and all. And so growing up, I would say I was a Braves fan more than anything because I was from Georgia, but I was really a fan of good baseball. And so I found that interesting. And then I just locked in on whatever the World Series was that year. I was all in on trying to watch every moment as much as as when I was younger, as much as my parents would let me, I guess would be the way to put it.
I mean, for me at an early age with Steve, I mean, I just turned 40 this year, but when I started getting into, I watched This Week in Baseball all the time, and it was something that was, I have old VHS recordings of it. But as I started getting in the age of internet, one of my favorite teams of all time is the Expos because of Valentine. But then Steve Rogers, who deserves such a better fate because, I mean, they every time I think of Rick Monday, I just kind of, especially Montreal fans don't like him, but honestly, that those early Braves team in the '80s, I think of was it Pascal Perez?
Yep.
You had
I-285.
Yeah.
He circled. He missed the start because he got on I-285 and didn't realize that it was a loop around Atlanta, and so he did like 2 or 3 loops of Atlanta and never got on to 75 to get to Fulton County Stadium.
That's like the real life National Lampoon European Vacation. Like I can't say Big Ben Parliament. No, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before. That is kind of cool about because we grew up in the Detroit area, and Rogelio was born in '81. I was born in '80. So the '84 team is really kind of too
fussy
early
memories.
for us. Yeah, we kind of, but we remember like '87 and stuff, which was big for us. But yeah, like my favorite players when I was a kid were the power speed guys. So I was all in on Darryl Strawberry and Eric Davis, and then Jose Canseco was like the greatest thing of all time, and then it all came crashing down. Yeah, all came crashing down. That was I don't know.
I'm going to make a guess that you all also had, I don't know, a few of those late '80s cards that I think were manufactured in I don't know, quantities of several billion. Like it's like this was all going to be our retirement plans, was having those cards from the I kept having the capability of buying those '87 Topps wood panel ones.
Yeah, those are
like
my favorite.
Yeah, for like 15, like the next 5 years, I was like, wow, these are still pretty cheap. I'll buy more of these. And it's like, yes, because they made enough of these to wallpaper the world,
Yeah, that's my brother is 6 years older than me, and at that time he had kind of like gotten into like, hey, maybe I'll be a card dealer. Like that was a potential career path at our age around then. Like, I'll sell baseball cards.
Sounded great.
So I was getting into that too. So yeah, I got into baseball cards right when they absolutely flooded the market and it became a disaster. That's like '88 to '92, and there was nothing.
Well, I do think of it. That is, if you said like why I ended up at Baseball America, '89, '90, that like end of my high school time, getting into like Ken Griffey Jr. and realizing that you could know about prospects before they reached the majors, which was a new concept to me at the time. That kind of was the formative the groundwork for like, I kind of like this. I kind of like the fact that I told all my friends, this Ken Griffey Jr. guy, you need to pay attention to him. Like, he's going to be good. And he then was, and it's like, wow, that's fun to know about that before he reaches the majors. And that kind of just set the stage for like, oh, I want to do more of this.
That's funny. I told I work at a company that focuses on music and movies and games and stuff. And I told one of my friends in music, I'm like, yeah, I'm really into prospects. It's kind of like being a hipster where you find out about a band first. And he's like, yeah, except not nearly as cool. I'm like, all right, fine. But I agree with you. Like I had the same feeling when, for me, when I got into prospects was like probably 2004 or so. And it probably had to do with fantasy baseball, but it was still the idea that like I can get an upper hand on these guys if I pay attention to these guys no one's paying attention to. So
And for me, it was when Lynn Henning used to post the prospect reports in the Free Press and the news, and I would keep clippings all the time. And the Detroit News used to have a thing where they had like local players in the majors, and that was kind of cool to see. Like when the A's were really good, and you had what was it? I'm trying to blank. The guy from Hazel
Van Poppel?
Park. No, not Van Poppel. He was the ace. What am I drawing blank? He was with the Dodgers in '81.
Bob Welch?
Bob Welch. Yeah, thank you. Because you saw Bob Welch in there all the time. Like, oh man, great Bob Welch is from this area, and he got all pumped like that. And so that's where my prospect began.
When I got to Macon, first job out of college was I was working at the Macon Telegraph, and I got to cover the minor league team. I did high schools and then that, and then I ended up doing Georgia and all that. But I got to do minor league baseball during the summer. And one of my jobs was to do that, our version of that. I had to do what the stats were for every former Macon Brave still in the minors, and then what the stats were for anyone from Middle Georgia who was in the minors. Rico Washington was a guy. There was guys who were in the. We had to do minors too. And my favorite part of that was, like I laugh about, like again, this was pre-internet, so like I literally like. All the other Braves teams would send me, they'd fax me their stats every Thursday or Friday. Like, so I would just show up the fax machine and there would be like, okay, so here's all the AA, the high A, the AAA, whatever. But then I had to go by call. I had to call everyone else. Like, so if they had been transferred, they'd been traded, or they're a Middle Georgia kid, who had gone. Rondell White was another one with the Expos at the time, who was, I had to figure out, know where he was. And then I had to call that team that week, and I'd say, "Can you give me Rondell White's stats?" Oh, wow. And my favorite one though is there was a former Macon Brave, Vince Moore, and he had gone to Mexico. And so my job every week was to call the Mexican team and use the Spanish, which my Spanish language skills are not great, but basically I knew enough to be able to say, hola, soy JJ Cooper and periodista con Baseball America, and then I would, say like, estadísticas para Vince Moore, por favor. And then they would, they would give them to me, and I would write them down, and I'll go, okay, wait. And I was like, okay, ocho, okay, 8, okay, and we do that. And we did that every week during the season for like 2 to 3 years. I was like, that was the pre-internet world of like, yeah, this is just how we do this. We just call, 20 teams every Thursday or Friday, get their stats for the week and put them in. And I kind of miss that. I mean, it was like, there's things that you thought were drudgery at the time that now it's like, that was actually kind of fun to get to do that every week.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of like dedication, and I think about the times before video games would keep stats for you. I would play like a full baseball season and keep all my own stats and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know, maybe we just didn't have enough to do back then. But
I think back on being our student paper in college. I was our fantasy baseball commissioner, which involved going every Wednesday to the newsstand right down from the office and buying the Baseball Weekly and getting those past 7-day stats, and then by hand writing all those down and then calculating up, because I didn't even know how to use spreadsheets at that point. I don't think I had a spreadsheet at that point. And like, I think of this now and it's like, that we did that? I mean, that's insane. That I just thought like, well, every week I'll spend 2 to 3 hours compiling the stats for the league, and then I'll hand them out, because we didn't have email either. So I would literally, like, as they came into the office, like, here's your stat pack for the week. That's stupid, but that's what we did.
Well, and that's how you end up with a job at Baseball America. You love baseball that much.
It is true. You don't do that if you're like, I think I'll dabble in this a little bit.
Yeah. So I think we should probably get into actual baseball stuff at some point. You're there in Georgia, or you were there in Georgia growing up, and lots of Braves exposure. And here we are now. The Braves are the World Series champions, and it's kind of you don't hear a lot of Tigers fans comparing the Tigers to the Braves, but in some ways they kind of remind me, at least the way they did the rebuild. It seemed like the Braves were very Now they obviously hit big on some position players, but it seemed like they spent a lot of resources on pitching, which seemed like what the Tigers did. And I don't know if you have any opinions or thoughts about that comparison, or
no, I think that there is the thing that okay, I agree with you on some of the similarities you hit on. There's the big distinction is, and again, Ronald Acuna didn't help them win the World Series this year, but hitting on Acuna and Albies is a pretty massive pair of wins on the international market, where doing that kind of puts you in great shape. But you are right. I do agree. Like, I think that the experience of the Braves is somewhat informative for the Tigers, which is, okay, you start with this pool of like 6, 7, 8 premium pitching prospects, and you know they're not all going to make it. Like, it's never happened. And I think we can even say right now, okay, so what you see happen is hopeful. If you're hopeful for the Tigers, is let's say that Mize and Skubal, or Skubal and Mize, end up being somewhat what the expectation of the hopes was. I mean, again, they had ups and downs. Both of them have. I'm still a little higher on Skubal long term than Mize myself. Maybe I'm wrong, but both of those guys, you say, okay, they end up being your Fried and Anderson types. You know, if you compared it to the Braves. Matt Manning, let's say, is not going to be that level, but maybe Matt Manning ends up being kind of, again, it's an analogy, so it's not ideal, but maybe he ends up being kind of like the Kyle Wright of it in some ways, where it's like and again, Kyle Wright was spent most of your AAA, but he did pitch, he did make a very important appearance in the World Series, but like more of a back end guy. And then you say, okay, well, what were some of the pitchers we left along the way? And like Alex Faedo, okay, probably not going to be what maybe the hopes were at some point. You know, maybe he ends up being useful as reliever. You know, what you see like that can happen. You know, Funkhauser type thing. You know, things like that you can see, and you go, okay. So you started with 7 or 8. I didn't list everyone. You end up with 2 good ones. You end up with 1 or 2 that are okay, and 1 or 2 that didn't make it, and you go, that's actually a pretty good return. Where I think that they're flipping it is, and we're going to talk about it, like what's happened now, though, is now the Tigers have the position player core kind of coming up, probably better timing-wise. Probably it's a little bit better this way to have the pitching arrive first, because the pitching often takes a little while to transition. And then to say, okay, I don't think it's outlandish to think that a Torkelson or a Riley Green can arrive in the majors and not need nearly as much of a transition as maybe a starting pitcher would, where you say, okay, hey, this is the year that Skubal and Mize both kind of take a step forward, but Torkelson and Riley Green hit the ground running, and all of a sudden their impact bats in the middle of the lineup right away or close to it. And then the key becomes okay, who are those other pieces that come along? You know, is Ryan Kreidler someone who you go, oh, hey, he's better than we thought, and then all of a sudden you've got this other key piece. You know, that's where I do think it's not an unrealistic possibility of how this could all develop.
And speaking of Ryan Kreidler, one of the things that I've noticed, and it's been quite some time since the Tigers have developed any type of homegrown prospect at short and second. I can count on one hand: Omar Infante, Ramon Santiago, Nick Castellanos at third. But in terms of, and then you go, well, maybe Scott Sizemore and Will Rhymes technically, but with Kreidler and some of the draft class, like Trey Cruz, who struggled at West Michigan and went down to Lakeland, is there anybody that right now, in terms of what's in their organization, that could come up and make an impact?
Impact, that's where it gets tough, right? Like,
yeah, I
mean, I don't think so. Like, from the standpoint of, like, again, doesn't mean it can't happen, but right. Are we looking for a guy who is a useful part of the lineup? Like, okay, he bats near the bottom of it, he plays the defense, or that, okay, then Gage Workman, Ryan Kreidler, you know, what is Pacheco going to do long term? All those are still at least plausible. Now, I don't think any of them is going to turn into the guy who you say, wow, that guy's batting, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this lineup. I mean, I go back to, like, this is one of the things I've been revisiting this probably too much because the Braves doing what they did this year is kind of, to me, evidence of a reminder of if you need help at the deadline at outfield, at first base, DH, at those positions, you can't get a shortstop for cheap at the deadline, trade deadline, but you can get an outfield. You can get just a hitter. And the one, everyone says, oh, you're just cherry picking because you're saying the Braves did this year. And I go back to the trade that I hated at the time beyond it, and really when a trade like this happens, I always go, okay, is there something I don't know that the team knows? Because usually I think you have to have some intellectual humility with this. Like if you do this, teams generally know more than we do, right? Like about something. But I remember when that JD Martinez trade happened, and I remember thinking, I'm sorry to bring up a sore subject, but I remember thinking at the time, it's like, is there something I don't know about Jose King or Dawel Lugo or Sergio Alcantara? Am I missing something? And then I quickly texted some scouts who I thought had seen those guys, and they got back to me, and it's like, no, I don't see anything that you're, if you think that guy could be like a utility infielder, yeah, maybe, and it kind of came back. It's like, I mean, I bring that up just because that was bringing in technically, I guess, 3 quote shortstops to the organization, but it's one of those things where it just kind of is an evidence of the fact that to find that's what we talked about, like that you can't get a shortstop. I think that if I'm the Tigers and you say, what can I do to speed this up? It's the free agent market of all free agent markets for shortstops. Don't hope that someone from this group of non-top 100 prospects, let's just be clear, for all these guys, is going to be that diamond in the rough that turns into your shortstop for 5 years. Spend money there. That's a perfect spot to spend money, because if you say that Trevor Story or Javier Baez is 3rd, 4th, or 5th on this list, they'd still be a massive upgrade for Detroit. If you said that somehow they get in the market for a Carlos Correa, or, wow, that would be a incredible, that all of a sudden, to me, this is the time for Detroit to do something like that, because the minute you do that, well, for one thing, all of a sudden, you're not asking Riley Green or Spencer Torkelson to step into the lineup and be the man from day one. You're asking them to be a really great second and third piece. But you say, we've got this guy this is the leader of the team. And the same way that when, go back a decade with Miguel Cabrera, like you have this player who legitimately is a star, and then you build around that. And the great thing about it, if you're the Tigers, is I know that Cabrera is still under contract, and and that's still going to be going for a while. But this is a team that doesn't have a whole lot of expensive players. There would seem to be the room to do so.
Yeah, you kind of touched on those are basically the 2 big storylines around here these days. Are we've discussed a ton on our blog, basically, that shortstops. We've talked about every one of them, and people are super excited. They want everybody wants Correa here. I think if you ask Tigers fans in general, they want Correa and they want Verlander. But there's one other story. It was kind of I don't know, it's kind of ongoing, and it's not a huge story to the public, but it's the Tigers have kind of basically, starting since the end of August, they've remade their player dev department in a pretty big way. They reassigned Dave Littlefield and David Chad, which is that's what happens in front offices. They kind of go off to the farm. So, but what I want to ask you though is something that I think you kind of, as somebody who covers the national minor league system and all that stuff, is you're kind of uniquely positioned to answer this. I'm always kind of curious about what the industry view of the Tigers is in terms of how are they viewed as a player development system? How were they viewed, or as, you mentioned that rough trade, were they viewed as an easy mark?
Yeah.
And international too, because it seems like they haven't got much international talent.
I would say, again, that trade was one that seemed horrible at the time, but it seemed like it was more of, I would put that as, I don't think that they thought that they were getting more from Jose King and Davo Lugo and Sergio Alcantara than the industry. I think it was an example of essentially a team going cheap in some ways. Like, okay, we're not going to win this year, so let's get rid of the salary. And I also, to be honest, I put that almost as an indictment on the industry as a whole, as I do. Like, if I was another team out there, JD Martinez was in the middle of one of the great offensive seasons that anyone's had in the last decade. If I was a scout or a front office official with another team, I would have been like, wait a second. We couldn't have done better than that. And the same way that, like, you see, again, I'm sorry, I'm going on a little tangent here, but like, I think that the Brewers trade for Willy Adames this past year, when they did it, which was, I think, late May, is going to be one of those trend-setting trades. And the reason I say that is that was a trade where a team filled, and again, the Rays are the Rays, so I'm not saying like the Rays got jobbed, because if you're making a trade with the Rays, whoever they ask for, if they're like, oh, and by the way, there's a guy we may have seen at the complex for a day, could we throw him in that trade? The answer is no, we will not. And now I need to call and find out. Oh, you heard this Curtis Mead guy, that maybe you got from Australia. Could you throw him? Can we do a deal for him? Yeah. No, don't do that. So I'm not saying that the Rays got jobbed here, but what I'm saying is that's an example of a trade where a team traded for a guy who wasn't in his contract expiration year, and they didn't wait till July. They did it early, and it kind of changed things. Well, I would describe the Tigers. I don't think that they've been viewed as an easy mark, but at the same time, they're also an organization. I would just say that they're kind of viewed as somewhat run-of-the-mill would be a way. Now, what I think you're seeing happening now is you're seeing the Tigers have a manager who has had his hands at different times in all aspects of an organization. This is AJ Hinch is not a guy who his background is, I'm just a manager. It was something where he's been a farm director. He's been with USA Baseball. He's done a variety of things. And usually you don't see a manager have like much impact below that level. I think with the Tigers, what you are seeing is this is a manager who is more involved in kind of the totality of an organization than you normally see, would be the way I would put it.
I mean, and it's still kind of fascinating to me, because I think a lot of us felt that he was headed to the White Sox.
Yeah.
And the Tigers were just kind of lucked out there. I mean, they were ready, to give him credit for that, but it sure felt like he was going to go to the White Sox, and then Jerry Reinsdorf stepped in, and the rest is history. But yeah, it does, because there's been, this season, there was enthusiasm about the Tigers for the first time in several years, or at least around here. And yeah, there's been a lot of that continuing, and a lot of it goes back to AJ Hinch. So it's kind of one of the more impactful managerial hires I can remember.
And not to mention, too, in terms of a draft, Chris and I were able to, when we did some of these pre-draft shows and podcasts, we were able to kind of go, okay, the Tigers are going to pick a tall guy from the SEC who can throw hard, and pinpoint it to the point, where it's like it was like science, and kind of like going, what SEC school? Oh, well, Alabama. And with David Chad involved, we knew it was somewhere in the Great Plains. They're going to pick up somebody. Oh, wait, they picked up somebody from Creighton yet again.
LSU, yeah. I used to do what I called scientific mock drafts, where I used zero intel. I just tried to guess who they would draft based on their past history. And one year I got 3 of the top 5 right.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is there. There are teams that have types, and then there's been over the years the Detroit Tigers, where you're right. I mean, and that's what was interesting this year. Like I said it at the time. Like, I'm fascinated by Jackson Jobe, okay, at the top. Again, but I'm fascinated by the Ty Madden pick. I really am. And the reason I say that is I'm fascinated because I do think that there's a certain amount of zagging where everyone else is zigging on that, which is, if you designed a pitcher to not have the attributes that are in vogue right now, Ty Madden's that guy. Ty Madden is best going down in the zone. Best when he tried to elevate top of the zone with his fastball, hitters' eyes got big and they did good things with it. When he went down in the zone, he was good. He's durable. He's been successful, but he's just not your 2021 prototypical pitcher. I like that. And I say that, this may sound weird, but I like that because I'm not being facetious when I say if it was 2008, I think Ty Madden is a top 10 pick. You look at his velocity, you look at his success rate in a major conference, you look at him doing it, the durability. His attributes just don't fit what teams are generally looking for right now. And I'm not saying, I don't want to make it sound like that if you have elite fastball carrying the top of the zone, that's ever going to go out of style. I don't think it is. But we are in a world right now where baseball is a move, counter move. That's just how baseball is. And so right now, what is happening, as I see it, is that baseball is filtering out hitters who can't do anything with elevated fastballs. Because as the game has gone more and more to sliders, especially, and elevated fastballs with carry at the top of the zone, well, if you can't do anything with that, you don't hit enough to stick around. Well, so let's project that out for the next 3-4 years. And again, throw the sticky stuff crackdown. We can feel confident in saying Ty Madden is not a sticky stuff guy, because if he is, he's the worst sticky stuff guy that's ever, it's not working for him if it is. Yeah. So he's not a sticky stuff guy. But as the crackdown on sticky stuff goes and things like that, I do think that what we're going to see is there's always an advantage to being unique. And again, I'm not saying that a guy who sinks the ball down the zone is like a unicorn or anything like that. But I do think that he's well-timed, that he may develop at a time where it's like, oh, we're not seeing as many of these guys. So he's more unusual doing it the way he does. And he may be facing hitters who are more predisposed to, okay, I've got to have a little bit more of a level swing. I got to be quick to get to 96 up in the zone. And all of a sudden, they're not as used to seeing 96 down in the zone. I'll be interested to see how that develops. I think that was a great second pick. If you took him in the top 10, maybe it would have been not as good a pick. I love where they took him.
Another guy that kind of reminds me of that, too, in the system right now is Reese Olson, who kind of attacked when we saw him in West Michigan. He was a low part of challenged batters on the inside. He had a really good fastball on the outside, too. And that was something that this year we went to, over 50 games, Chris, or something like that to that effect. And one of the things that I noticed was the likes of Garrett Hill, Bo Brisky, and Brendan White. And you think to yourself, these guys have pretty decent strikeout numbers, but they're drafted all in the 26th, 27th round. I mean, Travis Fernandez, who's down in AFL, was drafted in the 36th round. So that's something for me personally, who've watched the system, to see, well, we're not having a Dave Nabrowski here who was at West Michigan, who was touted the minor league pitcher, like one of the top prospects, but you look at his numbers, you're like, okay, well, I mean, this is back, 15, 20 years ago, but anyways, I digress. But to me, the one thing I noticed is that some of the pitchers that I don't like, the Tigers by necessity, because they didn't really have a lot of minor league depth and pitching wise, seemed they rose to the occasion. And I'm just wondering if there's anything to do with, we joke about the Chris Fetter effect. We may have a. Oh,
that's where I was going to go. We just talked about AJ Hinch, and again, I'm not telling anyone on this who's listening to this anything you all don't know. So I apologize for that. But AJ Hinch's background is one that's not just being a manager at the major league level. Well, Chris Fetter, that's a perfect example of everything lining up perfectly for the Tigers. I think that he was someone who, if the Rockies had approached and said, hey, we want you to be our pitching coach and we want you to make an impact on our staff, I don't think he'd have been interested. I think he was quite happy where he was. But he got to fulfill kind of I think everyone has a dream at some point if you're working baseball to work at the major league level. But to do so where it's like, hey, I'm not having to uproot my family or anything like that. And he has that background. He's been in the minors with, really did great work with the Dodgers. He's been at the college level and really done a great job of developing some really talented pitchers when he was at Michigan. And then he's at the major league level. But that's one of the things we're also seeing now, which is it used to be, and there's things where it goes poorly sometimes with organizations as well, but it used to be that there could be massive disconnects between what your major league pitching coach taught and what your minor league pitching coaches taught. And a lot of times we would hear examples where there might be a disconnect between what your low A pitching coach taught and your high A. And it's like a guy goes from one level to the next and you go, what happened to that guy? And it's like, oh, he was working up and down and they were really emphasizing him, emphasizing his fastball up in the zone. And then he got to the next level and they were trying to get him to work side to side and it just didn't work for him. And it's like, okay, that was a lack of cohesiveness in the organization. And the problem you have when you lack that cohesiveness is if I'm a pitcher and I go from one level and they tell me I need to do this, and I go to the next and they tell me I need to do this, and then I go to the next and they tell me I need to go back to what I was doing 2 levels ago, I lose trust. I have to take more command. A pitcher always has to take command of their own development in some ways. But I at that point say, okay, these guys aren't going to help me because they don't know what they're doing. Well, nowadays what you see is you see a more of a cohesiveness in instruction where you want there to be a semi-consistent message that starts from the day you arrive in an organization to the day you're pitching in the majors. And again, when I say a semi-cohesive, that doesn't mean that you don't have different points of emphasis at different levels. But it does mean to me that what you're saying at one level is not counter to what you've been taught at another. And having a guy like Chris Fetter makes that he understands what it's like at different levels and different development points because that's something he's done. That's something he's been involved in. So maybe it is that at low A, we're going to emphasize change-up development, or we're going to emphasize fastball command, or whatever it is. You can't throw it all at them at one time. Right. But whatever it is, and you have to individualize it for the pitcher as well. But you're not going to go from that to then you get to high A and you say, okay, step 2 now is, by the way, you were working on change-up development before, but now we're going to tell you to junk your change-up and just focus on throwing breaking balls. No, it's going to have a consistent thread. And I don't mean this with the Tigers. I mean this in the industry overall. There was a time, and we still see examples of it, where you will see pitchers go from one level to another, and you kind of figure out why did they either take off or why did they hit a speed bump. And sometimes in hindsight, what you'll hear is, oh, they were taught then to do something counter to what would work for them before. It's like, well, why did they do that? But that's something that happens. And I do think that the Tigers are getting to a more cohesive. And again, you could go overboard with it. Like the Astros are a great example of an organization that I think has been extremely cohesive in what they do. And it has worked out in many ways for them. Like you look at they're in the World Series, and they were in the World Series with a rotation that Verlander was hurt, Greinke was largely hurt, where, okay, McCullers got hurt, but he's homegrown. And then Luis Garcia's homegrown, and Framber Valdez is homegrown, and Jose Urquidy is homegrown. So it really worked for them. But there's also been a sameness to it where it didn't work it has not worked for Forrest Whitley. It did not work for Franklin Perez. I mean, I'm sorry to bring up another sort of subject, but I was seeing Franklin Perez right before that trade, because he was in Bowie's Creek, which is right down the road from us, and we knew about the knee injury. What we didn't know is that the shoulder was also part of that too, or maybe it wasn't yet. But again, this is where pitching is hard. But I do think that there's a more of a cohesiveness to what the Tigers are trying to do now.
I was thinking there was an article in The Athletic about the Phillies not that long ago. It was all about how there was mixed messaging up and down the system, and how there was like half the people were doing driveline stuff and the other half were doing old school stuff and how none of it worked. It was like, oh, what a disaster. So yeah, I don't think there's ever. I mean, the Tigers did their usual kind of every 2 year minor league coaching cleaning of the house, but it felt a little more impactful this year because of bringing in Ryan Garco and like he seems to have a pretty consistent vision for what they want to do.
And again, what you talk about, Ryan Garco, multidiscipline. Like he's been a player, obviously. He's been a college coach. He's been, he's been a minor. You are talking about someone who's had their hands in a couple of different environments. And I mean, that's the other thing we're seeing overall here is I do feel like it's not 100% of the time, but when we talk about Federer, when we talk about Garco, the college game, understandably, is going to be where more innovation happens. Not always, but generally more. And you say, well, why is that? The major league side, major league teams have much more resources and all that. Yeah, but they also have a lot more bureaucracy because of that too. If I want to do something, if I want to implement something as a college pitching coach, I pretty much have to sell the head coach on it. Okay, go do that, Nate Yeski. Go do that. Again, we could, Chris Federer, go do that. If I want to do that as a Major League Baseball team, I have to get sign off from probably about 10 different people to get this done because I got to get the president of baseball or GM, to approve it. But I've probably got to get the training and conditioning staff to approve it. I've got to make sure that the Major League club agrees with the Major League coaching staff on that side, pitching or hitting, agrees with this, and get buy-in from the pitching coordinator on the minor league side or the hitting coordinator on the minor league side. And by the way, if I'm getting that, but the coaches at all these levels don't agree with it and don't buy into it, well, it doesn't really matter because what's going to happen is when the hitting coordinator or the pitching coordinator shows up, you're going to work that way for 6 days. And then when they leave, it's going to be like, okay, now we're back to what we were doing before. There's just so many more parts that have to be all aligned than do at a college level. So that's why I think we've seen more of this recent trend where you see college pitching coaches who jump from there to the majors and are immediately among the more in-demand coaches out there. The Chris Federers, the Derek Johnsons, the people like that. Where, well, why is that? It's because if I have new ideas or ideas that I'm adapting from other places, I can get that implemented at the snap of a finger at the college level. And I'm turning around a cruise ship if I try to do that at the major league level.
I mean, I think of even right now, the Tigers have not, we mentioned, so one of the last questions I had was, look at Rojas's experience in Pittsburgh and going back to Boston as a pitching coach. And the Tigers have always, at least in my opinion, have always been behind internationally. I remember when former GM Randy Smith they had like one Latin scout for the entire area. Randy Smith hired 3 or 4 quickly throughout the system, and then you saw him have schools in the Dominican Republic, what have you. So what kind of, for Rojas, even when there's a Cuban player out there, I automatically assume they're going to go to Chicago White Sox or Houston, who has 18 now. But do you believe that with Rojas' experience, is it going to help the Tigers get somewhere in the international side?
Well, okay. The only way I know to answer that is with a giant big if, which is we don't know what international is going to look like in the new CBA, which is it could change if there's a draft, which I think there's a decent likelihood that there's going to be an international draft. All of this changes, and the reality of it is that the way it's now working in the international market, especially in Latin America, if you're trying to make a bigger impact in the current system, it's likely to take years. And I say that partly because you're going to be looking around in the, I don't want to call it the discard pile, but you're going to be looking around players who have been overlooked for the first year or two. And the reason is because the current system is one in which most of these players agree to deals, or their Buscones agree to deals years before they turn 16. And so you can be saying, oh, we're going to make a bigger impact. And there's not going to be the ability to say, okay, well, we're going to be players in the biggest players in the market. Those have already, but there's also the possibility that we could be talking about the 2022 or at the latest, the 2023 international draft. And the minute it becomes a draft, the entire dynamics have changed. And at that point, everything we've talked about from the old system, throw it out, because I don't care if you're the most plugged in and you've got the best relationships with the most important, Buscones in the Dominican, in Venezuela, in wherever. It kind of doesn't matter as much anymore, because what's going to happen now is I pick 4, I pick 4th. I get to decide, I've got to evaluate, I've got to scout, but it's not where having the relationship that goes back for 10 years is the difference between my $1.5 million offer trumping someone else's $1.5 million offer, or my $1.5 million offer not even getting on the table because they've already agreed to $1.1 million 2 years ago. Now it's about evaluation. And so that could change it dramatically. And that's even more so. I mean, we kind of know that the MLB draft is likely to largely remain the same in the new CBA. I don't have any confidence to say that the international market and the way it works right now is going to remain anything like what it has so far, because I think that is one of the items on their likely to-do list.
That makes sense. So JJ, we don't want to keep you here forever. You've already given us 45 minutes, which is awesome. But I do have to. I feel like I have to ask you something because there's nobody better to ask. And so I've been following Baseball America for, 10, 12, 15 years now, listening to podcasts, all that stuff. And when I think of you, I think of basically breaking like the big minor league stories, the realignment and things like that. And I think of the Rule 5 draft.
It is my Twitter bio. I mean, I leave it there year round.
Yes.
I love the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah, and people who know will they'll complain about that, or not complain about it, but say like you're wasting your time. And then you can look back and say, hey, you know what? Who was the most exciting player of the Tigers? Who was the most exciting player of the Tigers this year? Like Badoo, and Garrett Whitlock was outstanding for the Red Sox. But this is a deeply nerdy thing that I don't know if you'll be able to help me with or not. Rogelio mentioned Reese Olson earlier. He was drafted, high schooler drafted in 2018. He was 18 when he was drafted, but he didn't pitch until he was 19. And Fangraphs lists him as Rule 5 eligible this year. Whereas Parker Meadows, Kingston Liniak, 2 high schoolers from 2018 the Tigers drafted, are listed as not eligible. I don't know how to square that. I know it's not high school and college, it's 19, but.
Okay, so let's see, signed July 2. He didn't turn 19 till July 31st.
Yeah.
So he signed as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. By my understanding, and I will follow up on this, but that's not eligible because he signed as an 18-year-old. He signed as an 18-year-old. I don't care when he played then, because that's it. He played but that's irrelevant. Like if you sign, it is your sign year if you sign during the season. Now that's the Rays were really clever about this years ago, where I remember Ronaldo Hernandez. It's like he signed and was assigned to the VSL club in like August 9th, and the VSL season ended on August 5th. And it's like that doesn't count then because he was assigned to a team that had already finished their season. That's obviously not the case in the case of Reece Olson. Again, on my first pass, I do not see why he would be eligible because high school player, 18 at the time of signing, that equals, and again, this is not a knock on Fangraphs and all, but like if you do this programmatically, I could see very well where it's like, oh, okay, he was July 31st, so that may trigger him to be an age 19 quote season, but he wasn't signed. He wasn't 19 at the time of signing. Now, I'll have to dive back into the arcane parts of the Rule 5. Like, wait a second, is it 19 by, because, is it 19 by X date or whatever? I don't, but everything I remember is no, it's, you look at the age of signing and he would not trigger the 19 provision of the Rule 5 draft.
Yeah. And so I tend to think that I'm just overly reliant on Fangraphs. They're having that there saying he's Rule 5 eligible or not. I don't really know of any other great, resource to look at and say this guy is, this guy isn't, because on the flip side, there's Eric De La Rosa, the outfielder who the Tigers sent to the Arizona Fall League, also drafted in 2018 out of junior college. He wasn't young, though. He was 21 when he was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
And Fangraphs lists him as not eligible until next year, whereas everybody else from the 2018 draft, Adam Wolf, all the other college players took.
I can state with basically 100% confidence. Like looking at that, like, okay, he was an 18, he was 21.
He's got to be eligible.
Again, and again, that's it. I mean, that's the reality of, like, there's going to be, that's probably a coding error or something like that. But that's, I mean, I'm not knocking them at all. The reason we have never done it is put out that is because there are all these little arcane ways that someone becomes eligible or not eligible. And I've never been confident that we could be 99.99% right on it. Like, and to go, there's always going to be that one or two players who signed a contract, then their medical came back. It was determined that they needed to renegotiate the contract because, he had an elbow injury or something like that, right? And because of that, anytime you do that, the player immediately becomes eligible. Elvis Luciano is an example of this. Signed with the Diamondbacks July 2, 2016. Contract voided, re-signed with the Diamondbacks later that year. Well, if you say, well, why was Luciano available in the Rule 5 draft after his age 18 season and then ended up as a Rule 5 pick as a 19-year-old? That's why. Those are so difficult to, there's the only way that you can make sure that you're getting those right is literally by hand seeing, okay, was there a voided contract? I love Arcane and the arcania that goes with the Rule 5 draft and goes with protection decisions. Like when I say I love the Rule 5 draft, and I apologize for going on this digression, but when I say I love it, one of the reasons I love it is everything around it. If you just said, every year the guys picked in the Rule 5 draft, most of them don't turn out. Okay, fine, you're right. But why I love it is this is the process by which teams are required to finally basically show their cards on players.
Mm-hmm.
When the protection deadline on November 19th comes around, basically it's a BS detector in some ways. You will hear all these teams talking about their struggling draft picks, and they'll go, we really believe in them. We really think that actually that 2 seasons he's had, it was injury based. He's going to be fine. And then the Rule 5 draft rolls around and they go, we're not adding him to the 40-man. We're going to leave him unprotected. And you say, see, no, they don't believe in that guy. They're exactly. No, okay. This leads to another digression, which I wanted to bring up because you guys would appreciate this as much as anyone. I love the Barnhart move for the Tigers.
Right.
But I also thought this is the perfect example all the way around of a window dressing trade. And what I mean by this is, I don't know if I've ever seen a better example of this. The Reds are trying to get rid of Barnhart's salary in a way that minimizes the blowback on them because their fans are understandably going to be incensed to if you just said, we sold the contract of Gold Glove catcher Tucker Barnhart to the Tigers for $1. That would look terrible for them, right? And if you're the Tigers, you know that you've got the Reds kind of in a position here where you or someone else can acquire Barnhart at a very low cost. What's the best way to do this? Do we have a recent second-round pick who has really struggled? It's perfect window dressing all the way around. Because what I mean by this is if you're the Reds, you can say, We hate that we had to give up Tucker Barnhart, but we did get a second-round pick in return. So, hey, we got value. And if you're the Tigers, rather than it being that a year from now you're not going to protect Nick Quintana, and then a year from then he's going to basically be out of the organization, you go, wow, that was a second-round pick that just never clicked. You can now say, look, we turned our second-round pick into our starting catcher. I mean, we got value for Nick Quintana, and everyone walks away happy from this. And it's one of those deals where you go, the fact, if Nick Quintana had been a 15th round pick, everyone would scream and say, look at how little value they got for it. But the fact that he was a second round pick, even if you asked me, and again, I'm not trying to pick on Nick Quintana, but if you asked me, what is the success rate of a college major program second round pick drafted partly for his bat, who goes off and hits under 200 in 2 seasons in low A over a 3-year span, and is entering their 4th pro season having not played successfully above low A, I would put that the success rate on that it's got to be in the low single digits. But because he's traded when he's traded, the Tigers can always say, it's not a bad pick. We got a catcher out of it. And the Reds can say, oh, it didn't work out, but you know what? We took a chance on a guy who was highly regarded coming into the draft just a few years ago, and so we took a chance on it, and it didn't work out. That's the craziest trade. That is a trade that, to me, I look at and go, that is the perfect window dressing trade of all window dressing trades.
The way you explain it, JJ, is just it's spot on, because it's just when we saw him live at West Michigan, and then I even saw him in Lakeland this year. I went down to Lakeland. I just thought, and Chris and I both got a lot of flack. He's not on your top 20 prospects list. It's like, look, this is what I see. And you're right about the success rate, because third basemen have one of the highest success rates when they're drafted in the first 2 rounds. And Chris and I did and Chris did his YouTube montage of some of the his first month or two at West Michigan. It wasn't pretty. So he's tired or whatever. And I'm not a pro scout by any stretch of the imaginations, and no one will claim to be.
Nor am I.
Yeah, but at the same time, I see what I see based off what I know. So,
well, this has been an overarching thing for me. It is a philosophy for me, and we tried to generally. Again, it's my philosophy. It's one we generally, I would say, adopt as an organization too at Baseball America, which is you often know more than you think you know at the time, which is like one of the harder things to do when it comes to prospects, especially nowadays, because pitching prospects can literally change in an hour. Like you mentioned Garrett Whitlock in the Rule 5 draft. We had Garrett Whitlock as one of our guys to watch for the Rule 5 draft, and Nikhil Badu is one of our guys to watch. Okay. I don't want to say, though, like, oh, look at us. We knew that Garrett Whitlock was going to do this, because the scouting reports, and Whitlock had been hurt. The scouting reports we had on Whitlock did not have the changeup that he has now. And I think he really developed that in spring training this year. So it's a really astute pick by the Red Sox, but it's also a development story. Like with pitchers, guys can develop, and all of a sudden what you think you know about a pitcher doesn't exist. The old school example of this forever will be, we liked Tom Glavine at Baseball America long before I was there. We liked him a lot, but his reports coming up through the minors didn't mention his changeup. Why? Because he didn't have the pitch that made him a Hall of Famer was something he basically developed in the majors. Well, so how do you evaluate and project? Oh, we project that this pitcher will add an 80 pitch that he doesn't have right now as a major leaguer and will become a Hall of Famer. You can't do that. But when it comes to hitters especially, you go back with Daz Cameron. Again, Daz Cameron's a big leaguer, but you go back with Daz Cameron. You go back with Derek Hill. You go back, again, I'm not just trying to pick on Tigers, but with Nick Quintana. Generally, when players struggle, in Alex Jackson's, it was kind of a formative example of this for me. Alex Jackson was considered maybe the best high school bat in his class coming out of high school. He goes to the Midwest League that next year with the Mariners, and he fails. Fails to the point that they have to stop, send him back to extended, send him to short season ball. And at the time, you got 1,000, as you should. the team's saying like, oh, you know, he got hurt. There's development issues, like, but we're really confident he's going to figure it out. And all those things are plausible. But the thing that's staring you in the face is top 10 picks who can't handle low A in their first full year generally fail.
Mm-hmm.
Bubba Starling, if you go back, Bubba Starling, top 10 pick. And that I remember I was at the USA Baseball Complex, you know, when that next year when the spring training rosters are being set, and it's like, Bubba Starling's not on the Royals low A roster. Text a couple people I know at the Royals. I call someone and they're like, oh, he's got some swing things he's working on. You know, he'll be there soon. But, you know, we didn't feel like, we felt like we wanted to do that in the more controlled environment of extended spring before sending him to low A.
Yeah.
And all that's plausible. But at the end of the day, it was telling you something. Byron Buxton, who played like that next year. Byron Buxton was playing in the Appy League against Bubba Starling, and it's like one of these guys is on his way, one of these guys is not. Why? Because what you do in the minors does tell you something about what you're going to do. Nick Quintana, at this point, what he did in college is somewhat irrelevant. I mean, again, it's just the reality of it is that the preponderance of evidence at this point indicates that he's going to continue to struggle to play. I hope we root for prospects. I hope he goes to the Reds for his sake. And maybe it is something where it's like, oh, what the Tigers were trying to get me to do was wrong for me.
Right.
It all clicks now. But to give an example of a guy I think that you guys shouted out, Nick Plummer was one of those guys, Michigan guy growing up, you know, a Michigan high school kid. Nick Plummer really struggled. This year, by far the best year of his pro career with the Cardinals. Had a great year at Double-A. But when you say about the Rule 5 draft and minor league free agency being the put up or shut up time, well, what did the Cardinals say? Believing. I mean, that's what they did. Like they did.
Right.
Like if they believed in him, all you had to do was add him to the 40-man. If you add him to the 40-man, you would have kept him from becoming a minor league free agent. And I like there being these inflection points where teams can give you all the happy talk they want. But at that moment, it's nope, this is a reality moment. The reality moment here is, oh, do you want to add him to the 40-man? No, we think he had a good year. We think he's improved, but not enough for us to say that we actually are going to basically plop a chip down and say we really believe in this guy. I think he's going to be a great minor league free agent for somebody. Absolutely should be someone in demand. Like, see if this step forward this year really is a sign that he's figured it out. But you also have those multiple years before this where you go, okay, here's a reason to be concerned.
Yeah, you know, it's always very fascinating to me when, you know, I think there is something to be said about guys who struggle immediately, and then a lot of them don't end up figuring it out like Plummer did. But the interesting cases like with the Royals players, where with Prado and Melendez, who they were okay, and then they had a brutal year, and then now they had these awesome seasons. You're like, all right, well, that's kind of development, right? But
that is development. But you hit on the key thing. They didn't. Like, there is a massive difference to me between I hit pro ball and I fail, I really struggle from day one, versus I hit pro ball, I'm good. Because MJ Melendez, like, for example, had a really good year in Lexington. Like, his low A year was like, oh, this is really interesting. I remember, you know, he was part of that. I remember seeing him at the Salad League All-Star game where you saw Prado, you saw him, you saw Sully Matthias, you know, all those guys. And it's like, okay, there's something here. And then he goes to Wilmington, and that is as bad a season. I've used this stat too often, but there are very few times that I've ever seen someone have more strikeouts than what they're batting at. Take the decimal point away. And it's like, if you have more strikeouts, 158 strikeouts, I think it was, and a 156 average, that's hard to do. But he did have, I mean, again, also, these are not robots, these are people. He had, I think from a development standpoint also, he had a foundation that he could go back to and say, I'm not awful. How do I know this? I was the man a year ago. I need to get back to being the man that pitchers fear when I'm in the batter's box. But he didn't have to go through, this seems too tough for me. They've never had any trouble getting me out. And I do think that there's a difference from that. The soft part of this, the emotional part of this is going to always be the toughest part to crack because every player is different and all that. But it would take a supreme level of confidence. You will hear people say this player clearly has too high of an opinion of themselves. You talk to players sometimes, that's actually not a bad thing. The only way that you can really succeed as a professional baseball player, especially as a hitter, is to probably have a slightly unrealistic viewpoint of who you are. Because if you don't, I've known players developmentally going up through the system who I would say are the most well-balanced, people. Sometimes they really struggle. Why? Because they have that amount of self-doubt where it's like, man, I'm hitting 210. Am I good enough for this? That player who thinks that they're the man, they get through that, I've gone 0 for my last 12 with 11 strikeouts. They may get through that a little bit better because of their level of self-confidence that might be a little bit narcissistic. It might be a little bit unrealistic, but it gives them that gravity. But when I say this, I don't mean that MJ Melendez, every conversation I've had with him, he's actually a pretty well-balanced individual. But what I mean by that is having success at some point to point back to gives you that grounding of saying, I'm working through something. Whereas if you just struggle everywhere you are in pro ball, I don't know if you have that foundation. You instead are like, everywhere I've ever gone in this, they've been better than me.
And probably just constantly searching for something new to try to fix it. Yeah, I can imagine. We've had plenty of conversations about the kind of need for super belief in yourself. I often bring up the Lenny Dykstra story about him facing. He was like, "Who's this up in the mound?" And they're like, "Lenny, that's Steve Carlton." He's like, "I'll hit him." Yeah. Like, all right, well, if you're super confident, then you won't fail, I guess. But
to take a different sport, but I mean, again, I'm a football fan, and it's like when they say why are wide receivers, often have these diva-like behavior, because you're lined up against someone every play, and you're not going to win every time. Mm-hmm. But there is something about that belief that if whenever a ball is thrown my way, I will catch it. I'll make the play. That feeds making those plays. Whereas if you think that you're not going to, you're less likely to do so. So, what happens is it feeds a cycle. So the more you do that, the more you do believe that you're the man. And then you also believe why am I only getting 8 targets a game? I'm the man. I need to be getting 15. And it feeds itself because the guy who's like, it's okay. They'll throw me a ball every now and then when then the opportunity arises. That player is probably not the one who's going to make the 90% catch rate because he feels like that. It's athletics are a very it's an unusual world and a very difficult one in many ways.
Yeah, we could discuss this for hours and hours, but we've already had you for an hour and 8 minutes now. It's awesome, JJ. I really appreciate all the time.
It's been fun.
I know you've got, I'm sure you've got a bunch of stuff to do. I know Baseball America's been rolling out the top 10 lists and the best tools and stuff. Is there anything else that you want to kind of promote right now?
So, we're also doing our draft report cards are rolling out right now. So if you check out, we're basically summarizing what everyone did as far as their, we're talking to all the scouting directors, getting that, that team feedback on what everyone did, as far as their 2021 draftees. We'll also have coming up, we're mentioning it here, November 19th, protection deadline. So I'm hoping we have a book that goes out November 19th. So I'm hoping to have as much Rule 5 or 40-man protection content as I can and as we can. Thank you. I see the prospect handbook there. But we have,
2008.
And then we'll have, I've got 17 sitting.
There you go.
There's Yohan Makata, but we'll have that coming up, and then obviously we'll have. I'll at some point I'll reach my dream of a 200-player Rule 5. My dream is that one of these days there will be a Rule 5 draft where I will have written up every player selected in the major league portion. I will never be able to get to everyone selected in the minor league portion, but everyone selected in the major league portion. Last year, I'm proud to say I did manage to work in there the number one pick in the minor league portion, Chase Pittsburgh, who's now a minor league free agent, so whatever. But I didn't have Tyler Gilbert in there, though, so the best minor league free agent, minor league Rule 5 pick of the past 20 years probably for first-year impact, if you said that. But we'll have that coming out. We've got a lot of other stuff. We have also our 2022, 2023, 2024 draft list are up at the site. And it's a crazy time. We got guys out. Josh Norris is out the Arizona Fall League doing stuff out there. Kyle Glazer's at the GM meetings doing stuff for the GM meetings. We have a piece that he just put up with I think 19 different MLB GMs and presidents talking about pitch clock for the major leagues and what that means and why, whether they like it or not. And I'll give you a spoiler. There seems to be a lot of desire to get a pitch clock to the major leagues. And so that's up there right now. A lot of stuff, just check it out, baseballamerica.com.
And we'll put the link in our podcast episode. This is going to be, since it's gone so well, we're going to make this as a part of the show later. It's going to be a separate episode. JJ, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it. I know the Bulldogs are doing pretty well.
I'm a UGA grad here.
Yeah, and Michigan. I mean, I'm a Michigan grad, and Chris went to Eastern, and Eastern's actually getting better.
Speaking of Bob Welch.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, speaking of Bob Welch, and then but Michigan somehow being ranked over Michigan State, I still think it's kind of a travesty.
Hey,
but then the Michigan State lost to Purdue, so.
Again, it has been interesting to watch. And again, I am a Georgia grad, so I understand. Like, I was not like, again, I've been covering this long enough that I root for players. I rooted for Brian Snitker because Brian Snitker was a manager who was great to me when he was the Macon Braves manager twice in the 90s. So I rooted for Brian Snitker. But I don't have a team nowadays because it's just the nature of what I do.
Right.
But at the same time, it has been interesting because I do have a lot of friends. I have family. I was texting with friends of mine who were like Braves fans who one was like, I'm tears of joy right now and they won it. But it's been fascinating to watch this year because it is the most fatalistic group of fans, understandably. Like one of my best friends growing up is a Falcons, Bulldogs who went to Georgia with me, and Braves fan. And this is such a weird world to exist in for him because it's like, no. I understand these teams are just designed to always break my heart and to do it in the most painful ways possible. Craig Kimbrell standing out in the bullpen, Brooks Conrad with the errors, Georgia having back-to-back years having 2 years where Alabama turns to a backup quarterback to seemingly rip a victory away. It's just like, that's just the nature of it. It's been a very weird year that way. It's like, are we living in a bizarro world here in 2021?
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, JJ, and we look forward to talking again soon. And we'll put the link in there. And for everybody who wants to check out the work, go to baseballamerica.com. And again, I'm really pumped to see what Jeff can do, and I'm really excited for him. And again, have a great weekend.
Thanks.
All right.